Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Larry Baxter, and I'm part of the CIHRRC team and on the CIHRRC board and hail from Halifax. And I'm very honored and humbled this afternoon to be doing this presentation because I'm just a small part of this large team that did this large project over the last couple years. So my role here this afternoon is to do the presentation of the results that we have for the evidence-informed recommendations on rehabilitation for older adults aging with HIV, a knowledge synthesis. Or as what I'd like to say, my alternative title is What We Know and Don't Know About Rehabilitation for Older Adults Living with HIV. We've already spent some time this morning, this afternoon, talking about aging and HIV, and we've talked about what rehab is. But one of the other things in the rehab world is that guidelines play and evidence plays a role in giving guidance, both to clinicians, educators, and ourselves who are living with HIV, to support the HIV rehabilitation, care, treatment, and support. So this afternoon, I'm going to give you a brief outline of the study and the methods that we use, some key findings, and then also to identify what's next. The research objectives, as you could identify from the title, is we were going to develop these evidence-informed recommendations to enhance rehabilitation for older adults living with HIV. We used a knowledge synthesis approach, and we were challenged because we knew that there was not a lot of specific evidence around HIV and comorbidities in aging. So what we did was split it into two parts, and Stream A was very specific to HIV rehabilitation and aging. And then we had Stream B, which was looking at rehabilitation interventions for those common comorbidities experienced by older adults living with HIV. And these have been mentioned many times over today, but the 8 that we zeroed in on or identified through the search strategy were the ones listed there on the screen. As well as these 8, we also looked for HIV and older adults in the search. Now, the search, step 1 was our search strategy and what was included and not included. For Stream A, we looked for any published evidence on HIV, rehabilitation, and aging. For Stream B, which we were looking at the comorbidities, we were looking at high-quality evidence. So we're looking at systematic reviews and meta-analysis for the effectiveness of rehabilitation interventions for those comorbidities that were identified there that are commonly experienced by older adults living with HIV. Step 2, and I was not involved in this part, but Kelly and Patty and our research assistant did all the data extraction and the synthesis. And then we came back as a team and we looked at the draft recommendations that were circulated to us, and we rated them on a grade rating from A, where we felt they were good, strong evidence, and we highly endorsed it, to a low evidence and low recommendation for it. And we made recommendations for a refinement. The step 4 was we went for an external endorsement, and these recommendations that had been refined by our research team were reviewed by 19 persons living with HIV and clinicians who work in the HIV care field. And this was through an online survey, and we were looking for endorsement and also any refinement that they could suggest to those recommendations. So the results that we got when we did the search for the low evidence or very low evidence articles around HIV, aging, and rehabilitation, we came up with 41 articles, from which 16 recommendations were developed. Stream B, a little more work, a little more evidence. This was the high-level evidence articles. We were able to get 108 articles, from which 36 recommendations were developed from those articles. So there's a lot of material. So for Stream A, which was the HIV-specific recommendations, there was a total of 16 of them, and as you can see, they were scattered over a number of categories. The most around was approaches to assessment and treatment, and there was one on intervention, one on exercise. There were a few around social supports and self-management and professional preparedness. And an example of the recommendation that came out of this process here is one here on neurocognitive screening. And so the suggestion is, for the recommendation, is that rehab professionals should conduct regular neurocognitive screening with older adults living with HIV, and where indicated, conduct complete assessments to identify early signs of HIV-associated executive functioning deficits, and then interventions to effectively prevent, reduce, or compensate for cognitive impairment. So that's an example of what came out of Stream A. Stream B, we got a lot more recommendations, 36 of them, and you can see again they were scattered throughout the different comorbidities, a lot of them in the stroke and cardiovascular area. A lot of the recommendations were around exercise as well throughout there. An example of one of the recommendations that came out of this process was for exercise, and this is based on exercise for older adults. Again, is regular forms of exercise, including strength and resistance training, endurance training, and balance and stability, may be strongly recommended for older adults with HIV who are medically stable to reduce fall rates, improve functional and physical performance, improve cardiopulmonary fitness, reduce depressive symptoms, and improve mood and quality of life. So there's an example of what came out of the Stream B. So when this went out to the external group of 19 people, we got suggestions and comments back, and the recommendations that we included in the final cut, the endorsement range was for 47 to 100% when we looked at each of the detailed recommendations. One of the things that we found as a team that we were challenged with, and me personally, was there was a huge number of recommendations to deal with. It was really hard to digest, and there was a lot of repetition and overlap. So one of the suggestions that came out of it and that was developed was, let's develop some overarching recommendations that will make it easier for the layperson or the clinician who doesn't have a lot of time to go through a lot of detail. These overarching recommendations would at least give you the flavor, the direction of where to go, and you'd get the gist of it. And if you then wanted some detail, you'd go into the more detailed recommendations. So we came up with 8 overarching recommendations. And bear with me, and we'll go through each of them fairly quickly so you get an idea of what the, not only what the overarching recommendations are, but what the detailed ones would be underneath them. So again, number 1, rehab professionals should be prepared to provide care for older adults with HIV who present with complex comorbidities affecting the various systems that may result in mental, physical, or social health challenges. Many of these will sound like motherhood, but they will provide direction. Number 2, rehab professionals should adopt an individualized and interprofessional approach. We've heard that several times today, to practice that is sensitive to the unique values, preferences, and needs of older adults with HIV. And this should include comprehensive assessment and treatment of physical, neurocognitive, and mental health impairments, uncertainty, worrying about the future, functional activity limitations, and social exclusion, while considering the intersection between personal and social attributes and broader determinants of health. Number 3, identified that multidisciplinary rehab, including the whole range, is strongly recommended across the continuum of care for older adults with HIV to address the multidimensional and episodic nature of the disability. and its various comorbidities. The fourth one said that the rehab professional should consider the role of extrinsic. Time's up completely. I didn't even see your 5-minute warning. Okay, so the fourth one, you can read that quickly. We should look at the extrinsic contextual factors. Number 5, we look at the intrinsic contextual factors, including self-management and spirituality. Number 6 is the exercise one. Number 7, cognitive rehabilitation interventions. And the 8th one is that in the absence of high-level evidence on rehabilitation, you should refer to the existing clinical practice guidelines for systemic reviews and meta-analysis for the specific comorbidity. So as I mentioned before, option A, if you want the quick study, look at the overarching recommendations. For those who want the more detailed ones, go into the detailed ones. So, to our knowledge, this is the first time that evidence-informed recommendations have been put together for rehabilitation developed specifically for older adults with HIV. We used a two-staged approach, combining evidence, and we also incorporated PHA and clinician values and preferences throughout the whole process. And this will provide a guide for rehabilitation for older adults living with HIV and comorbidities. What's next? There'll be dissemination and knowledge translation both through the CIHRRC website, conferences and publications. And I think the other thing is that it identifies a lot of areas for additional research. Although we have identified the comorbidities, they haven't been done in the context of HIV and older adults. So there's a whole area range for research for the researchers over the next decade. And if you want more information, don't come to me. Go to Patty or Kelly, and their addresses or their email there. Thanks very much, and acknowledgements to the people who helped out with this and to CIHRRC for funding as well. Yeah.